Welcome back. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend and you all did really well on your tests. I have the grades posted and uploaded into D2L. And I know a couple of you were talking about how irritating it was that you couldn't go back and fix answers and things like that. And I have reached out to help people at Pearson, and I've got that figured out. So for next time, you should be able to go back and fix an answer or, try to change things up a little bit if you want to. So to get that issue resolved, you'll have a couple of videos that you'll watch, and I'm not going to have any questions on those this time. You'll just get points for watching them. Okay, so I'll explain what those are as we go through. And then also, since this is an animal behavior unit, I'm going to attempt to take some videos of my animals showing some different behaviors and different concepts that we're going to cover today and use that as your lab. So be looking for information on that in the daily checklist, and also posted there in D2L for the actual video and the assignment. So we're kind of transitioning today from the animal unit into ecology. And I really like animal behavior here because it's a really good transition between the study of animals and also how animals interact with each other in the same population or same species, okay? And then also, as we get into ecology a little bit further, we'll see how animals interact with other species and so forth. And so I really like this chapter because it kind of transitions a little bit kind of between animals and ecology. The first part of this chapter is going to talk about some basic behavior principles, and then we'll talk about some types of animal behaviors. So first of all, we're in chapter 26, and we're going to start off talking about what behavior is. I think you probably understand what behavior is, but maybe might have a little bit more difficult time trying to put it into words. So according to our textbook, behavior is defined as any observable activity of a living animal. So it's an observable activity, something you can see and watch play out. Okay, so we all know what examples of behavior is, like moths flying to bright lights. Okay, that's an example. Or people dancing, or playing sports, or anything like that. Okay, now there's always been a debate between nature and nurture, right? What really affects how animals, or humans in that case, behave? Well, honestly, I think it's both. Animal behavior is influenced by its genes, and animals' genes, or humans' genes, and its environment. I think they both play a role in animal behavior. And I think depending on the behavior, depending on the situation, one may be more of under genetic control in one situation, and another behavior may be more environmental. But I think as a whole, animal behaviors are influenced by both genes and the environment. So what are some of the ways that genes influence behavior? Well, we can see genetic influence in what we call innate behaviors. And innate behaviors are basically behaviors that happen or are performed by the animal without any prior experience. Okay, we talked about the innate immune defenses, things that you're born with, right? You just have because you're human. That's what an innate behavior is. It's a behavior you have because you are human, or because a sparrow is a sparrow. And so one indication that genes influence the development of behavior in animals is because they're performed by newborn animals. Okay, so if you think of a newborn baby, um, the newborn baby is going to basically automatically know how to nurse when it's given the proper stimulus. Okay, so we call these innate behaviors. We also call them instincts, because the behavior can happen the first time the animal is presented with that stimulus. Okay, so nursing is an example. A newborn foal, its instinct is to stand up, and then within a couple of hours, it will begin nursing. Okay, nobody taught it how to do that. Nobody taught the mom how to be a mom. It was just all instinct or innate behavior. Okay, and so geneticists, scientists have been trying to really study this nature versus nurture thing. And there are geneticists out there that look at the genetic influence on behavior and different types of behaviors. And so if you're interested in this, there's a lot in this chapter that I've kind of paired out. So if there's any of this that you're interested in, you can definitely go back and reread that information in the chapter, just kind of FYI kind of thing. But when scientists study genetic traits, they have what's called a knockout group. And these are kind of like maybe a control, sort of. Where they remove, well, actually it's not, sorry. They remove a particular gene. So in mice, this gene called V1AR, this gene has been removed in the knockout animals. Okay, so that would actually be one of the experimental groups. So they would remove that particular gene. And if they remove this particular gene in this strain of mice or group of mice, they see that they will engage in risky behaviors, like going out and just hanging out in brightly lit areas. You know, mice scurry around, they hide, they like the dark areas and so forth, and presumably to avoid predation. But if you remove this gene, they don't engage in those safe precautionary type behaviors. Let's see. Development and expression of behavior can be influenced. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. I got off here just a little bit. This gene is one that codes for a protein, right? Remember, transcription, translation, gene expression is basically the production of proteins. Okay, this gene codes for a protein that serves as a receptor for a hormone. And without the receptor, the mouse participates in risky behavior. Okay, so that's kind of how that would work. So in a normal mouse with this gene, the protein to make the receptor is there, the hormone is received, and they know to be more cautious. But if you remove that gene, the protein cannot be produced, and they engage in that more risky behavior. There's some others as well. Maternal instinct is an innate or a genetic a genetically driven behavior. And there are also studies in mice where they knock out, and I don't remember the gene, a particular gene, and those mother mice, when they have their babies, they basically are like, what are these things? They have no maternal care in them at all. They basically abandon the babies and just act like they have no idea what's going on, where the mice with the gene will go ahead and take care and nurture the babies. So those are some examples of research studies that have been done looking at genetic influences on behavior. Now, obviously, the environment influences behavior as well. You know, we've talked about cold-blooded animals, ectotherms, and how, you know, snakes will get cold and they'll go seek out a warm place to lay to warm up their bodies. So the environment is definitely influencing their behavior in that way. But when an environment is causing an animal's behavior to change, we're looking at the physical environment and also those experiences that arise from the environment, from others around them, from temperature, other types of environmental changes. So looking at another research study, looking at how in this way the environment affects behavior, looking at the zebrafish raised in different waters with different oxygen contents, they were looking at aggressive behavior, and fish that grew up in high oxygen environments seemed to be more aggressive than those that grew up in or were raised in low oxygen environments. And I didn't read through this study, but I'm kind of thinking maybe it makes sense, because the more oxygen you have, maybe the more efficient your metabolism could be, and they have extra energy to go and be aggressive, where these guys are just, they have just barely enough oxygen to survive and metabolize and things like that. Perhaps that's the key there. I don't know. Something to think about. But behaviors influenced by the experiences in the environment have the ability or the capacity to make relatively permanent changes in behavior. And so when you have an experience and that permanently changes your behavior, that's called learning. Okay, so hopefully this class has given you experiences that have permanently changed your behavior. Hopefully you've learned something in the last 2 semesters, and I know you have. So an example would be learning language, learning biology, or sparrows using stars for navigation is another example that the book uses. A type of behavior is called habituation, and that is defined as a decline in response to a repeated stimulus. Okay, so here example, okay, like if you go out into a pasture where there is prairie dogs, you walk out there. The prairie dog, there's a sentinel, they have different jobs. We'll talk about that at the end of this chapter. The prairie dog sentinel will call out an alarm, and it's really kind of cool. We're going to talk about different types of animal communication, but they have different alarms. So they have a different sound, a different auditory communication for human than they will for hawk or coyote or whatever the other type of predator or danger is out there. So if you walk out in a normal prairie dog town, the sentinel dog's going to make a little chirping noise and say, "Oh, everybody hide, here comes a human." Okay, now that costs a lot of energy. Okay, so all of his little friends that are out are wandering around eating, okay, and they're trained when they hear the sound, they run and they hide. Okay, that takes a lot of time and energy for them to go and do that. So the more a prairie dog is around a person, it's like if people come every day, kind of like taming an animal. If you come every day and they see that you're not a threat, that you're not there to eat them or anything like that, like in this little picture here with the boy, you know, they're not freaked out. They're not going to waste time and energy to go and hide for a non-threat. Okay, so that's an example of habituation. Another type of behavior is imprinting. And I raise horses, and one of the things you hear about imprinting in horses is when foals are born, sometimes people will undergo a process to imprint them. And we see it a lot in birds as well, especially like migratory birds like geese, you'll see it in ducks and so forth. But imprinting is basically a way of learning where the animal's nervous system, okay, the brain and nervous response is programmed during a certain period of development. Usually it's within so many hours after birth. And this information learned during this period, it's called the sensitive period. Basically imprints or ingrains these behaviors into the animal, and it's really hard to alter them later. So for example, baby birds, like baby ducks or baby geese, will follow the first thing that they see move. So generally in the wild, that's going to be mom, right? Mom wants all of her babies to come and follow her so she can keep them safe for predators while she is out foraging for food, okay? So if you've ever heard the term, do you have your ducks in a row? Okay, and some people are like, I don't even have ducks, I just have squirrels, and they're at a rave. That may be what you feel like during this pandemic. Yeah, some days. That's where that comes from, is the baby ducks, once they see something moved, it's imprinted into their nervous system to follow that. And there have been studies where they'll roll different types of balls and do different things like that, and the poor little duck or the goose will basically be imprinted to follow a ball. And so it's just a type of animal behavior. If you've had philosophy or any other type of social science, maybe you have heard about Ivan Pavlov or Pavlov's dogs. Okay, he was a scientist that basically looked at stimulus with dogs and their behavior. And so if you've ever studied this before, you know that he studied the dogs. When they saw their food, they'd start salivating, right? And that's just humans do that too. When you smell food, you start to salivate. There are certain hormones that are triggered that you'll start producing digestive enzymes from your pancreas when you smell certain foods. Okay, so that's basically like an innate response. So the dogs see food, just innately they'll start salivating. But they also, what he did was when he brought the food in and the dogs saw the food, he would ring a bell. And the dogs basically formed an association between the sight of the food, the bell, and being fed. And so after a certain period of time, all Pavlov had to do is ring the bell and the dogs would start salivating. And this is called classical conditioning. Okay, so Pavlov's dog is like the basically classic research experiment that shows classical conditioning. And conditioning, let's define that. Conditioning is basically a learned association between a stimulus and a response. Okay, so if I get my video thing to work, maybe you'll be able to see a stimulus that I provide for my animals and the response that we get from them. We'll see. Another form of more complex learning is called trial and error learning, in which animals learn through experience. And they associate a behavior with a positive or negative outcome. Okay, so one trial and error experience that probably all of us have done is, you know, you're standing in the kitchen and the toddler's like, ooh, I want to touch, you know, the stove. And mom says, no, it's too hot. Don't touch it. toddler probably touches it anyway. And that trial showed them that if you touch something hot, that's a negative outcome. Okay. Now, if they were to go and touch the, I don't know, sink, for example, that's probably not going to be hot. Okay. Another example is the hungry toad. Toad is like, man, I'm really hungry. Here's this flying thing. I'm going to eat it. Tries to swallow a bee. Bee's not going to have anything of it, and it's going to sting him. And so next time he sees the bee, he's probably not going to want to eat that and get stung again. He'll settle for a dragonfly. Okay, trial and error. Trial and error is sometimes known as operant conditioning. And if you've studied Pavlov's dogs, chances are you've probably studied Skinner's rats. And that's where the rats learn to press a lever to get the food reward that they wanted. Let's see. Operant conditioning is a way we can use to train animals. They talk about in the book about using rats to sniff out buried landmines. And if they find one, they get a treat. You know, they do that with drug sniffing dogs as well. It's how we could train animals for useful purposes. Another big important part of learning is social learning. Social learning is where we pick up behaviors, or animals pick up behaviors by watching or listening to others of their species. Okay, well, let me tell you about social learning going on in my house right now. My son, Jason, you guys met him one day, I think the last day before spring break, and at the STEM Friday thing, but he does not like school. Okay, he would rather be outside doing something with his hands, not a fan of school. Okay, complains. Homeschooling him has been challenging. Okay, complains, does not like homework, doesn't really like homeschooling, and so it's been a challenge. My little girl Ellie, you guys met her too at the STEM Friday if you went. She's always loved school. She's excelled at school. She's just loving it to death. Okay, but being homeschooled right now, she's listening to her brother complain and her older sister complain a little bit. And now, because of all the complaining going on by brother and a little bit by older sister, she's now decided that she needs to complain about her homework too. And it's like, no, you don't have to complain about this. You like school. It's going to be okay. But it's amazing how we pick up things by watching other people. So if you have little kids in your life, they watch you more than you know. So social learning is a way that behaviors can be learned by observing and then copying the behavior of other animals. And so can be seen in complaining in children. It can be seen by figuring out where to find food, how to avoid predators, and those kinds of things. So that's called social learning. And another higher level learning or higher level behavior is called insight, and that is problem solving without trial and error. Okay, so this is what we would call in academia critical thinking. Okay, is where you're presented with a problem that you haven't experienced before, and you have to kind of use your insight, use your intellect to figure out how to deal with that problem. So sometimes animals seem to suddenly solve problems without any prior experience. And like I mentioned, is how humans would use concepts to come to a solution, or I would call it critical thinking. In the human world, but in animals, we saw the octopus doing some insight learning and how to get out of the jar. There are also experiments where they would put, I forget, some sort of primates, a monkey, chimpanzee maybe, in a room, put some bananas up tied from the ceiling and put a box in the room. And the monkey will figure out how to get the box in the correct position and get the bananas down. Okay, that's that whole type of insight learning. But crows, especially the New Caledonian crow, are really good at problem solving. And the book goes through some example of how the birds not only use tools, but can make tools from things in their environment to get food. There's also examples out there of research or observations, I should say, where crows have been found taking coins and putting them in vending machines to secure a snack. So that's kind of funny. But one of the videos that you're going to watch is called Behavior Basics. Okay, and again, I didn't make up a question sheet for this, but you'll get points for watching it. So this might be a good time if you want to stop here and watch that video and just kind of review a little bit of basic information about behavior in general. And then you can pick this lecture video back up. The 3 videos that I'm going to have you guys watch do need to be watched on, was it the 21st, that Tuesday, when you're supposed to be doing chapter 26. Okay. So now we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and get into where this is crossing over into a little bit of ecology. Because competing for resources is going to be one of the more frequent types of interactions between animals. Okay, competing for mates, for space, for food, water, those types of interactions and how those animals behave and what they choose to do with those situations is going to be probably one of the most frequent types of interactions that animals are going to have with each other. Okay, so when they are looking to compete for resources, aggressive behavior helps to secure those resources. Okay, if you're the meanest, toughest, fastest, whatever, you're probably going to outcompete other individuals for that particular resource. So aggressive behaviors could be things like combat, which could injure or kill the other organism, the other animal, or at least maybe drive them off to go live somewhere else. And because of this aggressive behavior, natural selection can basically drive traits to basically animals that are more fit to survive and reproduce. But it can also drive ways of resolving conflicts so we don't kill everyone in this fight. And so, you know, having aggressive killing type behaviors is very, very costly, not only for the individual, but also for the population. You know, even for the survivor, you know, you may be injured, and that could put you at risk for disease or infection or starvation. And so fighting to the death may not always be necessary or the best way to resolve a conflict. And so animals that live in groups where there's constant interaction tend to form a dominance hierarchy. And that's where they basically figure out a pecking order or a rank to determine who gets access to resources and when, and sometimes in what order they get to have access to those resources. And so basically, once you have the hierarchy kind of figured out, each animal learns its place, and there's not this fight to the death or fight till an injury at every feeding time. Okay, so one of the things I'm hoping to do is to show you my animals and see if you can figure out their dominance hierarchy at feeding time. Okay, when I introduce a new animal or bring one, here in a few weeks, I'm going to bring a new horse home, or well, she's my horse. She's at a different place, bring her home. There's going to be a couple of days, at least a few hours, where they're going to have to figure out their hierarchy again and figure out where she fits into that place. Okay, so once you get the hierarchy figured out, the one on the bottom of the totem pole knows that it has to wait until the others are done eating or got their fill so that they can then move in. Okay, and I do a good job of, or I think I do, you know, spacing out their food so they don't have to wait in line. But if this was a natural situation where, you know, maybe coyotes have made a kill, the ones on the bottom of the totem pole might not get to eat. Okay, where the ones at the top are going to get to eat their fill, and then the ones in the middle may or may not get to eat enough. Okay, so the dominant individuals, again, get the most resources, okay, and then they develop a pecking order. Okay, that's where that term comes from, is actually from chickens. Chickens will really peck their friends really badly sometimes. Okay, another way for animals to secure resources or compete for resources, well, secure them really, is to form a territory. And territories are places where they find mates or food or space. That's a space. Okay, and that's where their resources are going to be. And so to stop fighting, making the hierarchy, having those aggressive competitions all the time, they form that territory, and the territoriality can lead to a reduced set of aggressive behaviors. Okay, so they go around, they'll mark their territory, like, this is my area, stay out. Now there may be fights over territory, but usually that, for a while anyway, can reduce some of those aggressive interactions. Whoops, let me go back. Usually territories are made by individual males, like buck deer will go and they will mark their territories. They'll scrape up with their antlers. They will urinate in different places and kind of mark their territory. But females can also be territorial, like female mountain lions, or mountain lions are usually solitary organisms. And so a female may have her territory, or groups like a pride of lions will have their territory as well. So it's generally individual males, but you can see it across other groups or individuals as well. Having a territory has benefits, and hopefully it will outweigh the cost of having that territory. Okay, so animals have to kind of balance the costs and benefits. You know, if it costs you your life to have a territory, because you're constantly trying to walk around and defend it and mark it and all of that, and that takes all of your time, and you can't go find food, that's not a very good cost benefit situation. Okay, but if you can mark your territory once every 6 weeks and you have all the food access inside of it that you want, that's a positive situation. Okay, now we have animals that interact, right? They're going to be interacting and competing among each other for resources. And so that interaction causes them to need to communicate with each other. And so communication is the production of a signal. Here's a good definition here for you. By one organism that causes the other organism to change its behavior. Okay. So hopefully that behavior will benefit both individuals. And so here's a few different types of communication. Visual communication works really good over short distances. Let's see. Visual communication may involve signals that you may have a change in size, a change in shape, or a change in color. White-tailed deer, they are really good at visual communication. If they sense a threat, they have a tail that they will flip up, and the underside of it's white. And that flip up is like basically a flag to make everyone else, well, all the other deer around them, aware that they've spotted something dangerous, that they may need to flee. Okay, so that's one example of visual communication. I'm hoping with my video you'll get to see some visual communication between my horses. They may change the location of certain parts of their body to indicate irritation. We'll see what happens. But those are some visual signs. As with everything, there's positive and negative things to everything. Visual signs, though, are instantaneous. Okay, so that's a good thing, right? As soon as that tail flips up, everybody knows that there is a danger around those deer. Okay, and they can change that signal very quickly. Okay, so I guess the deer is probably not a really good example, but if two wolves come over here in this example there, and they're both kind of showing aggressive behaviors, if one of them is like, oh, I don't really want to fight today, it's not worth it, I'll go eat over here, or I'll go find a mate somewhere else, immediately this one can tuck tail and get into a submissive position and communicate that, okay, I don't want to fight with you. Here he's communicating, or they are communicating that they want to fight. And then if one becomes submissive, that communication can be received by the other one. On the negative side, though, visual signals aren't really good in dense vegetation. So out here on the plains, white-tailed deer flips the tail up. Oh man, you can see that for a long ways away. But in a very dense vegetated area, the distance you can see that flag is going to be limited, or in the darkness, which white-tailed deer can see very well in the dark. But you know, those visual communications are limited in the dark. Whoops. Oh, I was going to mention, I'm sorry, got off onto my notes. I was going to mention back here too, animals that use a lot of visual communication have well-developed eyes. And I was just going to tell you about the pronghorn antelope. They're a species that we have here, and we're the running lopes, so it's our little mascot. They have vision that's like looking through 8x binoculars, and they have a wider field of view than humans. So if you were to take binoculars that are 8 power and look through them all the time, like, they can see that distance. They have very good eyes. That's called the pronghorn antelope. All right. Another type of communication is sound, and sound is effective over longer distances than visual. Let's see. They receive it almost instantaneously. You know, if you're like a half a mile or a mile away, it might be a little bit slower, but it's almost instantaneous, and the sounds can go through the darkness and dense forests and so forth. You know, if, you go to the rainforests and so forth, and you can hear some very loud sounds, and you have, as a human, you may not know where that sound is coming from, but you can hear those through the dense vegetation. So African elephants can be heard by other elephants several miles away. Acoustic messages or sound signals can be conveyed very rapidly, and they can vary their messages. Like I mentioned with the prairie dogs, you change the pattern, the volume, or the pitch, and that means there's a different type of predator coming, okay, or a different type of signal. Another type of communication is chemical messages, and these are going to stick around longer than perhaps visual or auditory communication, but they're going to be harder to vary. Okay, because typically there's like one scent, one chemical message, and that's about it. And so you can't really vary it. But these chemical messages are called pheromones and are typically only detectable by the species that emits them. And they're longer lasting, so even after the animal has left the area, that scent may still be there. And so there are different species of animals that release pheromones during breeding season, and a male can track a female over several miles because of the long-lived, the pheromones are still in the place that she was. There is some research looking at human pheromones, about how, I'll just let you guys read there's a Scientific American article if you want to Google that and look about human pheromones. There's not a ton of evidence that humans are driven by pheromones, at least in modern times, but perhaps they were years ago, long time ago. So you can check that out if you're interested. And the last one is going to be communication by touch. When there's close physical contact, it can signal between two animals. You know, if you think of like a special ops team getting ready to breach a building or whatever, they'll give each other basically touch signals on which way to go, left or right, or stop or whatever. And so that's a way to communicate with each other, is through touch. Okay, so the next section talks about what the animals communicate about. And a lot of times it is warnings, as we saw, food, locations of food, things like that, water, locations of mates, okay? And honeybees are really good at communicating the location of food, and they have what's called the waggle dance. And that is their main form of communication, to tell how to find a food or a water source, okay? And basically what they do is, let's see, this bee has gone out, found a food source over here. It will come back to the hive and basically move and wiggle in certain directions in relation to the sun, and that will basically identify the direction in which the other bees can fly to find that food. And there's a video that I'm going to have you guys watch as well. This is one that is for credit. I forget the name of it offhand, but it's like the bee waggle dance or something like that. So go ahead and watch that, and you can see how bees communicate with each other. And so bees, like other organisms, live in a society. And a society is basically where animals tend to associate with others. And, you know, bees have a really strong society, a very well-developed society, where other animals may be more solitary. Like I mentioned, the mountain lion, they tend to be very solitary animals. And so some are very solitary, others are living in structured societies. And that's basically a complex, highly structured living interaction among animals. And living in a group, like all things that we've talked about, has advantages and disadvantages. And of course, those advantages need to outweigh the disadvantages. Some of the benefits or advantages are increased ability to basically evade predation, increased hunting, and increased ability to find food. Division of labor, and also the increased likelihood of finding a mate. So those are some of the benefits. Some of the risks, okay, or the negatives are basically the others when there's not enough resources to go around. So increased competition, increased risk of disease when you live with a bunch of other organisms of the same species, increased risk of the offspring not surviving, increased risk of being spotted by predators, and increased risk of competition for mates. Okay, so in order for the society to be beneficial, need to have the positives outweighing the negatives. So the degree to which some animals of the same species cooperate may vary quite a bit. I talked about the mountain lion where they just kind of fight over some food once in a while and mate. Then you have loose social groups like schools of fish, flocks of birds, herds of musk oxen, which are these little guys here. And then like the bee, they may have very complex relationships. The book gives an example of baboon troops. A group of baboons is called a troop. If one gets threatened by something, the others may come and defend it. Dolphins work together to monopolize and defend females. And then some societies, like the bees, that says bees, ants, termites, and naked mole rats. Aren't these guys cute? Not really. They have a division of labor where they have several different castes. Like if you've studied history before, like a caste system is where you have different hierarchies of people doing different types of jobs or different living arrangements. In the mole rat, the colony is dominated by a queen, and she's the only reproductive female. And then she has the workers, and some workers clean, whoops, that looks terrible, clean the tunnels and gather food, and others dig new tunnels and defend against predators. Very similar to a bee hive or bee society. The queen's main function is to reproduce and form the eggs. The males are called drones. And all they do is mate and then die. And then sterile females, basically do all the work. So that is a bee society. I also have an ant video that I'd like for you guys to watch and to look through as well for credit. One thing I forgot to mention, we were going to have, if you remember last semester, was it the beginning of this semester? I don't remember. One of the semesters we were going to have termites and they all died. And we were going to use various types of ink to draw lines, and then the little termites would follow the lines because a chemical in certain types of ink is the same, very similar chemically to their pheromones. So they can basically, when they go and they've found food, they leave a pheromone trail. Ants do this as well. And so the termites will think the ink is a trail to another place for food. You can get them to go in circles and things like that. And so that was basically the experiment we were going to do earlier in the year and look at that. But that's how they would have worked, is basically the chemicals from the ink was like their pheromone, and they would trace that to wherever it went. Another cool thing that we were going to do is behavioral experiments with brine shrimp, and obviously we're not doing that, so we'll hopefully my animal video will work out for us here as well. One thing before I do leave you is I wanted to give you one more definition. It's called altruism, and that's where, like our sentinel prairie dog that we were talking about, they basically self-sacrifice for the good of the colony. To benefit the larger group. Okay, so the sentinel basically sacrifices itself, and it stays up there and it makes the noises and it does the warning, and it's at a higher risk of being, snatched by a predator than the others, but they basically do that to kind of protect the group. Okay, and that's called altruism. Okay, so there will be a mastering homework, and watch those 3 videos and the lab, and we will come back next time and we're going to move into chapter 27, looking at ecology a little bit more specifically with population growth. Okay, so I hope you guys are having a good day, and we will talk to you again soon.